Hello chess enthusiasts, my name is Miha and welcome to my chessrealm YouTube channel. So European Championship has ended, there were lots of nice games were played there, and I found another interesting game from the 9th round between international master Abdulla Gadimbayli and more famous grandmaster David Navara. Let's see what happened. In the game, Abdulla Gadimbayli had white pieces and he started with e4, c5, knight to f3, d6, d4, c captures on d4, knight recaptures, knight to f6, knight to c3, and now a6, and we have Najdorf variation of Sicilian defense. Bishop to e3 or bishop to e2 are pretty modest replies, but white goes for a sharper continuation. Bishop to g5 was played, so we are expecting an interesting battle. Black plays knight from d goes to d7, preventing this doubling pawns on the f file, and now white plays queen to e2, first of all allowing white to castle queenside, also supporting his e pawn because white intends to advance some time in the future. Black plays h6, attacking bishop on g5. White doesn't want to give up on his bishop pair, so bishop goes to h4. As stated before, usually f4 is played and later with e5, so maybe black could try with g5, but that will weaken his position too much. So black plays g6, preparing to fianchetto his dark square bishop, and now white plays f4. Of course, threatening with e5, even if black captures, white recaptures, attacking the knight, and also threatening with e6. Very unpleasant already in the beginning. So black has no other option but to play e5, preventing the advancing of this e pawn, also attacking this knight on d4. White plays f pawn captures on e5, d pawn recaptures, and now white castles queen side. Now you can see this knight on d4 is still under attack, but if black grabs this knight on d4, then white plays e5, attacking this knight. Knight is pinned from the bishop, so black cannot remove it, or black loses the queen. And if black grabs the material further, if d pawn captures on c3, then simply f pawn recaptures with check. Black can defend either with queen or with bishop. Of course, with queen he wouldn't defend, so after a bishop to e7, white is going to capture material. Again would be equal. Well, white could try even with a waiting move, let's say king to b3. Of course, black cannot castle, because if black castle, then f pawn captures, forking both queen and rook. And of course, queen has to stay on this post, preventing this checkmate on e7. Also, knight here is pinned, so here black is totally lost here. So in the game, black plays queen to e7. Now this pin on knight on f6 doesn't work anymore, so white plays knight goes back to b3, and now b5 action on the queen side, trying to harass this white king. Well, black still didn't castle, so white has a lot of good moves at his disposal. Maybe one of the more interesting moves would be simply if white would capture knight on d7, removing one of the defenders of the knight on f6, so black would have no other options but to recapture with knight, and after knight to d5, white occupies a very important spare, attacking the queen. White is chained down, but the harmony between his pieces is much better. It only takes, let's say, one more wrong move. Let's say queen to b7, knight to a5, attacking the queen, gaining another tempo, and after, let's say, queen to b8, then bishop to f6, attacking the rook. Well, black could remove the rook, but if black captures on f6, knight simply recaptures. If it's check, if king goes to d8, it's knight to c6, forking both king and the queen, and after king to e7, then again we have knight to c6, forking both king and the queen, and after king captures knight on f6, knight recaptures queen, rook recaptures knight, and what do we have? We have queen versus rook and a bishop, and this is much better for white. Okay, let's go back to our game. In the game, white plays knight to d5 immediately, attacking queen on c7, and also double attack on this knight on f6. Of course, queen cannot go back to d8, or knight simply captures, and I cannot recapture because it's pinned by the rook. So black has no other option but to capture on d5, and now e-pawn recaptures, preparing to advance on d6 further into the black's position at the correct time. So black immediately counteract with bishop to d6, blocking pawn on d5, and also preparing to castle king side, getting his king into the safety. So white counteracts with queen to d2. Now black cannot castle because pawn on h6 is under attack. So black plays f5, preparing this g5, later with f4 with the action on the king side. Of course, position around the black king on the king side is weakened, so white tries to open the game. g4 was played, attacking pawn on f5. Of course, black can capture on g4, but then after bishop to d3, white attack this pawn on g6. Now pawn on h6 is still under attack, so the rook cannot support this g6 pawn. And if, for example, black tries with king to f7 with a rook to f1 check, if black still wants to defend this g6 pawn, after king to g7 is bishop to f6, and there goes our exchange. So in the game, black has decided to keep the files close. f4 was played, and now white plays g5, offering the trade of pawns. Well, let's see, black could try with blocking the position with h5, or maybe even e4 would be a very interesting option. Let's say e4 would maybe even be better, because now we have these two very strong passed pawns. This pawn on f4 is protected, black threatens with e3. Let's say even queen to d4 doesn't help, attacking this rook on h8, because after knight to e5, of course, pawn is not protected, but after queen captures, we have bishop to c5 attacking the queen, also threatening here to checkmate on c2, so white has to defend with, let's say, queen to g2, and after f3 it only takes one row of move, let's say queen to f2. Now black attacks the queen with knight on g4, and after queen goes to d2 we have bishop to f4, and this queen is pinned, and if, for example, queen captures, we have immediate checkmate. Okay, let's go back to our game. So in the game, black captures pawn on g5, and now bishop recaptures, and now black intends to get rid of this knight on d7, preparing bishop to f4, knight to b6 was played, of course threatening with bishop to f5, targeting this pawn on c2, later with rook to c8. In this case, this pawn would be 3 times attacked, so white immediately counterattacks with bishop to d3, attacking pawn on g6. Black nevertheless plays bishop to f5, and now white plays queen to e2, threatening to grab this pawn on f4. Of course, e-pawn cannot recapture because it's pinned by the queen. So black has to get this king out of the e-file. Black, of course, cannot castle queen side because of the bishop, but black could castle king side. Well, this would be totally good option, even if white captures, rook simply recaptures. Yeah, position around the king is weakened, but it's not likely that white would be able to start any serious attack on the king. In the game, however, black has decided to play king to f7. Material is still equal in position, but the position is very tricky because now white plays a very stunning move. Knight goes to d4. So we have double attack on this bishop on f5. Of course, knight on d4 is attacked, but if knight captures on, pawn captures on d4, we simply have bishop recaptures on f5. And now black would have the two options. Either pawn would recapture, or maybe even try with the intermediate move. Those are, let's say, two main options. Let's see, if pawn captures on f5, then queen invades on e6 check. Now king has two options. If king goes to g7, then we have, let's say, rook to g1, preparing deadly attack here on king. If black makes a random move, we have mate in 2, bishop to h6, king to h7, and queen to g6 checkmate. If, for example, black would try to trade in the queen to c8, then we have bishop to f4 check. After the only move, king to f8, we have bishop to d6 checkmate. If, however, king would go to f8, then we would have queen to f6, attacking the king and the rook. Of course, here black would have to give up on his rook on h8, because if king goes to g8, again we have rook to g1, again preparing deadly attack on here on the king. Rook to a7 doesn't help. Still we have bishop to h6 check. Of course, if king to h7, queen to g6 checkmate. If king to g7, rook simply captures. After rook recaptures, queen to g7 checkmate. Let's take a look at another variation. If black would first try with rook to e8, attacking the queen. Well, here white would have to find a very strong move, queen to d3. And of course, black can grab this bishop again, but if again we have g-pawn captures, queen recaptures again, king has to go to either g8 or g7. Again, we have rook to g1 with deadly attack. If, however, black would try first with rook to e3, attacking the queen, white would probably play bishop to g6 check. King has more options, but let's say if king goes to g7, we have queen to d4 check. King, let's say, captures bishop on g6, queen to f6 check, and of course this rook is under attack. And if black defends with king to h7, again queen to f5 check, king has to go, let's say, to g7, and again rook to g7, and again black king is done here. So the bottom line is black cannot capture knight on d4. Instead, black plays bishop captures bishop on d3, and now rook recaptures on d3. Again, pawn cannot capture because the queen invades on e6. Here in this position, black should have played rook to e8, taking over the e file, attacking the queen, because then pawn would be able to capture on d4. But instead, black makes a fatal blunder. Knight capture defenseless pawn on f5. And now white responds with knight to f5. Of course, knight is under attack, but this knight is also under attack. And if black removes knight from d5, then rook captures on bishop on d6. Of course, black would try with bishop on e6, but this is a very interesting continuation. Knight would capture, knight would recapture, then rook from h to d1, threatening with rook to d7, double attack on queen and knight, and after rook to d8, white simply captures, rook recaptures, queen recaptures, and now white captures pawn on d5. Material is still equal, but white is going to grab this pawn, and with the pawn up is going to have a winning endgame, even if black tries with the f3. Let's say we have queen to f6 attacking the king and the knight, so king has to go to e8 defending, after queen to h8 attacking the king, king to e7, now queen captures queen, king recaptures, and now this knight is still pinned, so white uses one tempo more, king to d2, trying to grab this f3 pawn. Even if black plays king to d7, bishop simply captures, king recaptures, king goes to e3, this pawn is going to be captured, and here white has additional pawn on the queen side, and this pawn is going to secure the victory. In the game, black has decided to capture knight on d5, and now of course white recaptures knight on d5, threatening with queen to d3, double attack on bishop on d6, and also targeting this pawn on f5. Well, black is in very difficult position. Maybe black would try with rook to f8, because double attack on this c2 pawn creates a mating threat, and black could also try with the f3, deflecting the queen later, even if queen goes to f2, bishop to c5. Well, black would still be in a difficult position, but at least he would have some counterplay here. In the game, however, black has decided to play rook to e8, and white responds with queen to d3, double attack on this bishop on d6, also attacking this pawn on f5. But first black plays e4, attacking the queen, so now white yet cannot capture this bishop on d6. White plays queen to b3, preparing this cover attack on the king, let's say trying to grab this queen on c7. Well, maybe black could try to give up on his bishop on d6. Let's say after queen to c4, even after queen captures, pawn recaptures, rook captures, bishop on d6. So white has a bishop for a pawn, but these three pawns on the king side are really intimidating. After, let's say, f3, white would have to put his king into the action, king to d3, trying to prevent the advancing of this pawn, because let's say if white still want to grab another pawn, then simply we would have let's say rook to f3, protecting this pawn, also threatening with e3 and so on, and things could get ugly for white pretty quickly. In the game, however, black has decided to get this king out of this discover check, so king to g7 was played, and now white plays rook to g1, preparing deadly attack on the king on g7. Of course, it takes only one row of mook. Let's say after a5, white would simply play bishop to d6 is check. If king goes to h7 or h6, we have queen to h3 checkmate. If, however, king goes to f7, then we have rook to f5 double check, and it's checkmate. If, however, king would go to f8, we have rook to f5 check. Black could only defend with the queen, but then rook simply captures, and it's checkmate. So in the game, black plays queen to b6, attacking this rook on g1. But now white plays a very sneaky move. Bishop goes to h6. It's a double check, so black cannot capture rook on g1. Let's see what are the options for black. Black would, of course, capture bishop on h6, or maybe to h7, to f6, or to f7. Well, let's see. If king captures bishop on h6, it's queen to h3, checkmate immediately. If king goes to f7, then we have mate in 2, rook to e5, it's check. And if, for example, black defends with rook to e6, queen to e6, checkmate. If, however, king goes to f6, it's bishop to h7, checkmate. And if, for example, king goes to f6, we have rook captures on d6, double attack on king and queen, so black has no other option but to capture rook. And then we have bishop to g5, it's check, and if king goes, let's say, somewhere on g5, we have a discover attack here along the g5 with bishop to e7, grabbing this queen. And if king goes to e5, we have bishop to f4, and now this queen is gone, because if king captures on f4, it's queen to g3 checkmate. So in the game, black has decided for the best option, king to h7, but that doesn't save him. Of course, bishop on h6 is attack, and also rook on g1. But here in this position, white finds a very, very spectacular move. Rook goes to c5. So first of all, we have clearance of this d5 square, threatening with queen to f7 with deadly attack, and also interfering this diagonal, so queen cannot capture this rook on g1. Well, let's see. It only takes one wrong move, let's say after a5 we have queen to f7 check, and after king captures bishop, then we have queen to g6 checkmate. So in the game, black plays bishop to e5. Now this g6 square is protected, but still we have mate in 5 here. You can try to find it, it's not so easy to see. Mate in 5 again starts with queen to f7 check. Of course, bishop to g7, queen to g7 checkmate, but after king to h6 we have queen to f5, threatening with queen to h3 with checkmate. Queen to e6 doesn't help, then white plays simply rook to c6, pinning this queen to the king. Of course, if queen captures, we have queen to h3 immediately. If, let's say, rook to g8, again queen to h3, this queen is pinned, so this again is checkmate. However, in the game, white doesn't find this continuation. In the game, queen to h3 was played. When this bishop is gone, we have deadly attack on the king. Black tries with rook to e6, trying to reinforce this h6 square, but still we have mate in 3 moves. You can try to find it for yourself. Mate in 3 starts with bishop to f6 check, and after rook to h6 is the only move. Then we have another stunning move, rook to c7 check. Of course, king cannot go anywhere, and this bishop protects g7 square, and if bishop captures rook, then you have rook to g7 checkmate. If, however, queen captures rook on c7, you have queen to h6 checkmate. In the game, however, white didn't find this mate in 3. I won't say it's easy to find, but this shouldn't have happened at this level. In the game, white plays bishop to f4 check. Black responds with rook to h6, that's the only option, and now we have queen to f5 check. King cannot go anywhere and can only defend with either rook or the queen. Well, let's see, if rook goes to g6, we have queen to f7 check. After rook to g7, rook simply captures on g7, bishop recaptures, the only options, and now rook to h5 check. After queen to h6, we have rook captures on h6, and it's checkmate. If, however, black defends the check with the queen, we have again a very stunning move. It's not forced move, so bishop to e5 would have to be played. Of course, queen cannot capture queen because of rook to g7 checkmate, and of course white prepared this deadly attack on c7. Rook to g8 doesn't help, we have rook to f7 check, and after rook to g7, rook captures, queen cannot capture because it's pinned. After king to h8, it's queen to f8 checkmate, and realizing that all is lost in this position, David Navara resigned the game. So I hope you like this game, I hope you have learned something from it. If you have any questions, my email is below in the description. Of course, I invite you to visit my Instagram page. That's it for now, and see you soon.